We are live. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody, wherever you are in the world. And it'll take a few minutes for everyone to join us and come in from the waiting room, but we've got plenty of people coming in already. And feel free to say hi in the chat if you know anybody who's on screen in front of you. So this is the Music Ally weekly show. My name is Joe Sparrow. I'm here in Berlin, and we'll do a quick introduction of our guests before we move on to the rest of the show while everyone arrives. Let's start with, Tom. Tom Gray, thank you for joining us. Tom, would you quickly sort of say who you are and what you do?
People probably know me best as a member of Gomez, a band I started when I was a kid at some point in the last century.
The Mercury Music Prize-winning.
Mercury Music Prize-winning, band Gomez. And I am a director of PRS and Music, elected writer-director. I sit on the songwriter committee of the Ivers Academy and their policy unit. But, you know, I'm not here representing any of those, really. I'm me.
You're here as Tom Gray.
Tom Gray
has been part of the Broken Record campaign, which has sort of really taken hold in the last couple of weeks in the UK, part of perhaps a wider movement around the world of bringing attention to payment for artists from streaming platforms. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. And Tom has been a big part of that in the UK, and that's part of the bigger picture. Also joining us, a very special guest as well, Sammy Andrews, CEO of Deviate Digital, and a veteran of the streaming and artist debate. Hi, Sammy.
Hi, I have been moaning about this. I want to say more than a decade, and it probably is, but then I don't look a day past it, do I? So, you know, but yeah, no, it's something that's quite close to my heart, and I think it's really interesting at the moment and timely for various reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, that this conversation is restarted and looked at properly.
Okay, great. And as ever, our extremely special regular guest, wonderful to see you again in a different location this week, Hen Heimdall of CD Baby. Hello.
Yeah, I moved about 6 feet this time. I figured a bit of artwork behind me, you know, mix it up.
Very sophisticated. Normally, Hen is noted for the shrubbery that is behind her, and today, because it's lockdown time, one needs to keep growing and sustainable. Got to mix it up when you're stuck in the same place. And last, but by no means least, the most hirsute man at Music Ally, it is Patrick Ross, who is SVP of Digital Strategy at Music Ally. Hello, Patrick.
Am I? Oh, yeah. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you having me back again. I keep testing your patience, but you keep having me back, and I appreciate it.
It's a contractual obligation. Nothing I can do about it. So yes, this week we'll be talking about the Broken Record campaign. You've either read about this almost certainly this week, or similar campaigns around the world calling for change around artist streaming royalties and label deals that are associated with them. Patrick, first of all, do you want to briefly describe, we're here on Music Ally TV, what Music Ally does?
Sure thing, Joe. Well, hopefully most of you know, and hopefully a lot of you subscribe to us. If not, we put subscription details into the chat. Make sure you subscribe to read us. But Music Ally is a knowledge company. So you engage with us in getting our daily emails, our daily bulletin, to come straight to your inbox with all the latest music industry news with a very nice tone, I'd like to say. We also do training and education, which we've also put in the chat. We've got a learning hub that we launched last year, which has suddenly become very relevant in our Corona times. And then we also do digital marketing hands-on for artists. So we try to do all three to make sure that we understand what's going on. We're writing about it, we're teaching about it, and we're actually doing it. So thank you guys for joining today.
That was the quick sell I was hoping for. Thank you, Patrick. Very grateful. Now, as Patrick says, one of perhaps the main points of contact people have with Music Ally is via the daily newsletter that gets sent out early every morning and is essential reading and analysis, and as well as the news that is published on Music Ally, and that is published by Stuart Dredge, the Music Ally editor. Now, normally at this point, he would be here and we would talk to him about one of the or two of the week's most important news stories. Well, our most important news story is here in the chat with us in the shape of Tom and Sammy, which is great. So, but Stu isn't here, unfortunately, So we're going to try something slightly new, a little bit daytime TV, and we pre-recorded a 5-minute quick Stu's News with Stu, and we're going to play that now. So this is experimental, and I'm hoping it will work, but let's see. Let me see. Okay, so this is Stu's News. We're going to 5 minutes. Stu is going to talk about the Broken Record campaign from the perspective of analysis, and that will then lead us into talking about it with the panel in just a few minutes. So here we go. Okay. Okay, Stu, thanks for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, we're talking about Broken Record campaign on the show today, and you've written a lot about it in the past week, and I'll drop that link in the chat for everyone to read shortly. But what I thought might be good is if you, to introduce the panel, first of all, explain what the Broken Record campaign is about and other campaigns like it, and bring us up to speed, and also to give us a bit of analysis on what it actually means in the wider picture.
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose a good place to start is this isn't a new hoo-ha, really, not a new controversy. So I think almost as long as there's been streaming, there's been artists and songwriters complaining about what they're paid. Like, I think we first covered, and not long after Spotify launched, there was a big controversy about Lady Gaga getting paid a really low amount for Poker Face for getting 1 million streams on Spotify. And that made loads of headlines, even though it ended up being a very kind of fractional part of the revenue that wasn't really the whole earnings from the song. So it's been this long running kind of saw, in a way, that streaming makes a certain amount of money for rights holders, but artists and songwriters were not seeing as much. But where Broken Record is interesting, and Keep Music Alive, which is the kind of the associated campaign, is they're not picking one scapegoat. So it's not about kind of fuck Spotify, which was actually a slogan about, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. There was a period when I was where like kind of fuck Spotify was the hashtag they were sharing. It's not about YouTube and the value gap alone. It's not even just about the major labels. It's kind of saying this system is broken, and how can we fix the different bits of it rather than just picking one big bad villain. And I think that is the really exciting thing, is it's trying to look at the system, not the individual people alone. That brings challenges. Like, it brings challenges if everyone starts thinking it's about Spotify or YouTube or one particular big bad guy. So you have to kind of run the campaign quite carefully, I think, to not just be seeming like you're getting at one person. But it also means you're trying to not just change one thing. You're not just trying to kind of say, let's make Spotify triple their royalties, as some people have sort of campaigned for. You're saying, let's kind of change these quite big systemic things that need a lot of buy-in from different people. And that is, it's the right way to do it, and it's simultaneously a bigger challenge, I think, because there's a lot of moving parts. But it's really good to see it being tackled that way.
I mean, you wrote this very long piece about it, I think last week, which got a great response and was shared by all sorts of people across the music industry, and rightly so. Like you say, what you're talking about and what the campaigns are talking about, this is a sort of new step. They've moved on from, I'm not saying they're going through stages of grief, but you've moved on from the sort of initial feeling of anger to saying, right, okay, how do we make change, and what is that about? So large systemic change, clearly by its nature, takes a long time, and it involves lots of different people changing. What did you sort of, I know the piece you wrote didn't have any sort of, you didn't have a sort of moment of divine inspiration that said, this is the way to go, but what are the likely next challenges, at least, that will need to be overcome?
Yeah, so I think one thing that Broken Record's doing, again, Tom can talk about this from his perspective, I think is talking about artists and deals and labels and contracts. So that is one part of this, is like, what is the artist's deal and how are they getting paid for streams? And one thing I think is interesting to maybe explore further is maybe two different kinds of artists. So there are artists who were signed 10, 15, 20 years ago, whose contracts predate streaming, who are not getting paid very well for streaming, and part of that is probably the deals they're on are not very good, and certainly maybe not very good for streaming revenue. So there's one issue of like, how do you fix that? And I know some labels have cancelled unrecouped advances or agreed to 50-50 splits with artists for legacy stuff. Like what are the things that labels can do to fix the old contracts, I suppose? But then the other side of this that's really interesting is like newer artists who've kind of come up with streaming. And I think maybe you get more of them think streaming is good. They see it as a positive thing. They're not really complaining about the royalties. And that's something that's really interesting to unpick. Is that because they have better deals, or is that because their deals are structured differently? Is it because they're making money in other areas and they see streaming as driver? And then the other thing is the even bigger structural changes, which I think Tom has been talking about, which is things like user-centric payouts. So where the money you pay, the royalties from your streaming subscription go only to the music you listen to. And that's been talked about for quite a while. There have been studies going back to like 2014, I think. But campaign is bringing this to light of like, why isn't this the way we pay out royalties? And I think that is really fascinating because it's a system that not many people understand, and a lot of fans don't understand. That's not how it works. Like most people are, well, no, a lot of people, when asked, think their stream royalties go to their music only, and they get quite shocked when you say that's not how it works, really. So I was thinking about the questions around that, which maybe it'd be good to get Tom talking about as well, which is like, the thing about user-centric is it seems fairer, like your money goes to your musicians. But if it needs everyone to agree, so it needs like labels to agree that we'll be paid this way, publishers to, collecting societies, it needs streaming services to say, yeah, we'll do this as well. There's a lot of people who you need to kind of agree. And that's like the bleak view is that the music industry is very good at not agreeing. Like,
do you have any sort of idea looking forward to finish things off how it might pan out in the coming year or so?
Well, I think the conversation about how much should we pay for a streaming subscription, that's going to carry on. And that's one where maybe I sense most willingness to move. So I think certainly in Spotify's financial results recently, Daniel Ek, CEO, he didn't rule out putting the prices up. Like he said, well, we've done some tests. People didn't mind too much. And it's good to know we have that when the economy improves. But yeah, I think the next year should see meaningful negotiations, conversations, collaboration to change the problems rather than just protests being shrugged off or kind of deflected.
Yeah, well, we're definitely in for an interesting ride, and I don't think this one is going to go away. So it'll be interesting to take some of your observations to the panel now and see what they think. But for this week, looking forward to seeing you soon, Stu, and thanks as always. So there we are. Did that work? I hope so. So Stu had some very interesting analysis there and was actually posing some questions to you. And perhaps that means we can get on with the panel. So for the people who are watching, the attendees, we're all here now, I think. If you do have any questions about this topic as they arise, please do put them in the Q&A. Hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we have two ways of answering the questions. The really good questions that are on topic, we will answer in person here with the panel. If you have any background questions about, for instance, Music Ally or how to work with Music Ally, we have someone in the background who can answer those questions by text. So Isabel will be there in the background, and she will do a very, very good job of answering your questions. But in the meantime, we can start. Now, the Broken Record campaign and its associated international sort of brethren, as Stu pointed out, has gained a lot of momentum in the last couple of weeks. In the UK, at least, the Broken Record campaign has had backing from artists like Tim Burgess of the Charlatans, who is currently riding very high in popularity with his Tim's Twitter listening parties that are happening every night, and vociferous support from people like Katie Tunstall. And what we're reaching now is a sort of more nuanced and evolved conversation around streaming and payments, and payments to artists and labels and the relationship between them. So, Tom, let's start with you. And I'm sure you've answered this question many times this week, but perhaps you can sort of give us a sort of brief idea of what your campaign points, if you like, are. And more interestingly, what Stu touched on there, what has the response been like from sort of industry and also the public?
So the important thing to understand about this is it just was born out of a rant on Twitter. I just got annoyed one night and wrote a sort of 10-tweet thread sort of breaking down how I thought it was wrong. I think for me, the big issue here is, which we have to really deal with, is why most of the thinking around this is sort of irrelevant now, is that this is COVID-19. Live is gone. PRO money is going to dry up shortly. Whatever anger you think there is in the industry now towards streaming, imagine it in 6 months' time, when the last of the money that's in touring musicians' bank accounts is gone, and when their PRS and PPL checks go through the floor. So you really have to, and that was what was really getting to me, because I was thinking, well, this has been problematic for such a long time, and that's why I called it broken record, because this is nothing new about this, right? I'm just saying basically the same things that you've heard a million times, but the context is completely changed. And the problem is that streaming always cannibalized culture and gave all of the income to a very small amount of the market. It always did that. It's just now it's deeply unhealthy. Now it's dangerously unhealthy. So I think that it's not just, when we're talking about these things, we need to not just focus on the sort of financial, structural, economics, which in our industry we all love to do, you know. The cultural shockwave of COVID, we need to be in line with that, you know, we really, as an industry, and that's really what I'm trying to do. And I really don't see broken record as being a protest movement at all. If it's akin to anything, it's akin to like an 80s term, like a pressure group. It's about saying collectively and as an industry, we all recognize that this is problematic. We all recognize this was never really right. And surely we're all bright enough and dynamic enough and willing enough collectively to do something about it. And that's, yeah, it is a long game, but this moment is the challenge. That's you know, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, coronavirus, like so many things in the world at the moment, has brought these issues that have been lingering for a long time to the surface. It's important to recognize that, but at the same time, this is a it's gaining a lot of momentum from artists and also the public. And yes, as you said, the industry acknowledges this. The industry understands it. We all understand the economics of it. But
there's two sides to it. One is that a lot of artists just don't understand their rights. The reason, one of the main reasons why that rant went completely viral was because, and most of the responses I was getting were like, "Oh God, I didn't know. I didn't know that my equitable remuneration from my performance right and my, you know, they didn't know all of those things." And they were like, "Oh God, no one's ever just written it down like that for me in a few sentences." And a lot of what has come out of it is just about this. Trying to avoid all of the technical complications that are obviously innate to it, but speaking to people very directly in plain English, without acronyms and all of the techno babble that our industry loves to hide and shroud itself in. And you know, and the reason, for me, the problem is a lot of the problems we've had with the industry is the reason why it doesn't get regulated. The reason why governments don't do anything about it is because they say, well, you know, the consumer's fine. The consumer isn't being touched by this. The prices stayed the same. Where's the consumer problem? And I'm like, well, there is a consumer problem, and consumers need to be educated about that. And it's twofold. One is your money doesn't go to your music, and two, if your music is in any way niche or off the beaten track, it has been severely defunded by streaming. And we're not doing anything about that. Streaming has been built by corporations for profit margins. It hasn't been built with any kind of sustainable cultural remit in mind.
Right. And now, like a lot of things in life, we're readdressing things, and it's sort of wiped the slate clean, and we understand things a bit more, which is a blessing and a curse, I guess, at the same time. Thanks, Tom. That's a really good starting point to sort of plant the flag. Sammy, our other very special guest, let's come to you. So, like Tom said, it's very easy to point fingers at bad guys.
There's plenty of fingers to point. I mean,
well, yes.
You know, when we talk about the elephant in the room here, there's a fucking room full of them, and I think that's partly what this discussion, you know, to Tom's point. I was sorry. Did you want to ask me a question? So I just jumped straight.
No. Well, I mean, I think you're going down the right path. But what I was I mean, let's see. But I think you've got it. But what I was going to say is, it's very easy to point fingers, and there's lots of people to point them at. But you know, well, let's start there then. You know, people are angry. Are they right to be angry?
I think in some levels, yes, but again, you need to, well, yes, they are, but it depends who you are. So I think it's important when we're talking about this, that, you know, again, let's clear one of those elephants out of the room. We all know people that are making a shitload of money from streaming. There's one of those elephants, you know, straight away, both artists and labels specifically. I mean, look at the reports from the earnings this year alone for the last year. But we're not necessarily talking about, I think it's quite dangerous when we discuss it with the public that they're like, you've got a, you know, they've got a mansion and they've got a, you know, whatever. What we're talking about really is the redistribution of some of that, because it's not fair to everyone. But also, to Stu's point at the start, to point a finger at a particular streaming service is ridiculous, like actually ridiculous. There's various streamings. No stream is equal. Let's start there. No stream is equal. No service is equal. No deal is equal. No rate is equal. But some of those things were set by people behind closed doors, some for large advances, for large amounts of money and equity. I'm going all in. I'm going all in from the start. So we're
here for an hour, so you know, you can you have time.
I'll try and get through. But then, you know, there's so many parts to this equation. And again, I have spoken about this a lot over the years, because I'm a streaming advocate, and I used to spend time at record labels trying to get my artists onto streaming services because the equivalent was free. The equivalent was piracy. So there's a part in this as well where, let's not forget, streaming, the only reason we've returned to growth is because of streaming. And that's an important part of this argument also. But then you've got stuff like, you know, back to the deals. Artists that I'm aware of, heritage acts, have deals. I don't even know what year, you know, they were originally produced in, but they are not relevant now, nor is breakage. You know, trying to apply a breakage across any sort of bonkers. Yeah. But then you've got, you know, the other side of the fence, black box. You know, let's have a look at that. There's a huge pot of money. In fact, there's several huge pots of money that can't be accounted for. That's an issue. You know, that's a data issue because the data's awful. Yeah, and that's an issue with people not being able to push it out. But that sits with the collection societies and the DSPs. But then you've got like data standardization issues, minimum viable data issues.
There's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot happening here. I mean,
I'm not even finished yet. I'm not even finished yet. Let me just, because I think it's
please, no, I'm happy for you to continue.
And then, you know, the splits in the first place. I think it's quite important to remember that some of the people own both sides of that split. When you're a large label and a large publishing house, there's so much, you know, if you start, then I think you have posted a link. One of my favorite articles that I read on this week was Stu Dredge.
I just posted it in the chat to read. Yeah.
If you've not read it, people read it. He sums it up perfectly for me within the right side. We're not just opening a can of worms. It's a can of worms Walmart, a can of worms festival. Like there's so many parts to this, and you know, to try and simplify it is difficult, because actually when you have a little look under that hood, there's a lot here. And to your point at the top of this call, this conversation is never going to move forward unless every stakeholder has it at the table. Yeah. You know, and I think we can talk about, you know, some of the potential solutions for it, but setting my stall out, that's always been my frustration, is that we know there's a million opinions on this, and we know also that it's within a lot of people's interests not to change things. But, you know, fucking hell, I don't recognize what the day's like from a week ago. Do you recognize what it was like from 10 years ago in terms of a deal setup? Some of the, you know, the deals and stuff in place, they're not relevant anymore. And it doesn't work for this modern day. Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting now because I've started.
No, you're getting some good feedback in the chat, by the way. Mike Burgess. Oh, hi, Mike. Nice to hear from you. Saying that,
Joe.
Particularly. Yes, Patrick.
So I'm going to put some fuel on your fire, Sammy.
Don't do that, mate.
I'm going to do some controversy for the chat. But before I do that, I just want to get some of the lovely questions that we've got through here and just trying to address them. One of them is, yes, exactly. Someone's asking about the fact that obviously streaming income, the amount of money coming in, has increased, which you've noted. And as someone's asked exactly that, but it's going to more artists than ever. So pie's gotten bigger, but the artist size has definitely gotten bigger. So thank you very much, Sean, for asking that question. Yeah. There was another question that was asked, which actually, Tom, you covered on the BBC yesterday. about our PRO checks drying up. And I think you've said yes to that. Obviously, hairdressers, shops, all these places licensing, and I'll let you talk more about that in just a second. But just before we go and maybe hear from Hen, who has a distribution head on, I'd like to say that maybe one of the founders of AWOL, who happens to be named after, well, I think Kevin Bacon is what he's called. He wanted to maybe point out that some of these things that are being said right now are ships that sailed 10 years ago. And actually, the music industry would be proper screwed, I'll say, if we didn't have streaming right now. So maybe it's a bit of a topic. Sammy, and I'll let you guys all take this away, but maybe it's something that we should be looking at about, okay, look, at least we're having this chat. We've got the money to fight over, but we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, Sammy, as you were saying, there's a, like you see, lift a little bit, and there's a lot of frustration. It's very easy for the public who have a large role to play here, but don't perhaps realize it. They see the big headlines that the music industry, the recorded music industry, is making as much money as it did in
perhaps, I mean,
2004.
again, perhaps they need to see it. This is the thing at the moment, you know, and again, there's so much around this, but if we and Kev, hello Kev, I hope you're well. But if we haven't had, I mean, I've been having these conversations for that long. The industry have had these conversations. The fact that nothing has moved should tell us how fucked that is. You know, the fact that there's a slight progress that has been made and has been faltered anyway. Within these are trying to have a look at user-centric, you know, and then I'm sure we can talk about that a bit more in a minute as well. But there's been various bloody court battles across the world, you know, to look at whether it's the royalty splits or the amount that's paid out. And some of those are internal issues. They are internal industry issues. They are nothing to do necessarily with the services. So we haven't got our house in order. And Kev's right. I think to say the ship sailed is one thing. I think the ship set off, but it's about time we brought it back. And right. I'm going to mute myself now because I'm going to rant some more.
I won't hold you back. And interesting metaphor you chose there, actually, which is, you know, turning a ship around. It takes a long time, doesn't it? Hen, let's get to you. And you often, you're Hen from CD Baby in London. We often talk to you from the perspective of emerging and smaller artists, which is a lot of the sort of artists you deal with, as well as the larger ones as well. So with all this in mind, you've got emerging artists starting to engage with the industry now. They're dealing with streaming. Are they, and they're perhaps hearing what Sammy's saying and thinking, oh shit. So are they actually perhaps in what sort of position are they in? Because they might be dealing directly with the DSPs without labels, or they might be, you know, or they might be able to sign, or they might be thinking about signing a label deal that distributes money between them. What's the state of play there?
I mean, I think what Stu touched on in the little news broadcast about new artists, I don't think there's necessarily that kind of hyper focus around the rates, as you can see with maybe some more kind of historical catalogue. I think they all see it as a really positive thing, and they're trying to work out how to interact with those services and obviously how to, you know, gain more traction and all of that. But, you know, they can't go to DSPs directly other than, you know, like a SoundCloud upload. They have to go through a distribution service, for instance. And I think that there's been a really positive shift in the industry in that there's so many choices now. And, you know, anything from a service where you can get 100% of your royalties and just pay a small fee to have your music available, and, you know, all the way down the scale to a really hands-on experience, but where you're charging a much higher percentage. So I think it's up to us, being the intermediaries, to educate our artists and our partners, to make them understand that, you know, we charge a flat 9% fee, which is relatively low, but we do a lot of work for that 9%. You know, we have office spaces, we have salaries that we need to pay for, and that money needs to come from somewhere. And you know, I don't think we're necessarily trying to no, we're not trying to screw over artists at all by charging that percentage. But you know, education is so key, I think, especially within the emerging sector.
Tom, I feel like you have something to say.
I've got a lot to say. Unfortunately, there's, you know, yes, there's lots of choices. Yes, the ship set off. God knows where it was going when it got itself together. But, you know, the system's been built for rights aggregators to make the most amount of money. That's what it's been built for, right? We all know that. And nobody's suffering under any illusion about that. So I also need to deal with this idea that younger artists aren't suffering with this. It's laughable. Here's the thing. I just put together this festival, with Tim Burgess called a listening party festival called the Broken Record Festival that's happening on the 24th of May. And we've got like John Grant and the Shins and Boy George, everyone playing their records.
Pins as well, right? I think.
And Pins,
yeah, excellent.
Pins, brilliant, stepped up, right? But let me be clear, I went through about 5-10 young acts who really wanted to, but were afraid of how the platforms would receive it if they were seen to be being critical of the situation.
The streaming platforms.
Streaming platforms. And were worried that they'd lose playlisting and they'd lose that kind of and I said to them, don't worry about that. We're not coming out, we're not criticizing anybody, but their managers in particular were very, very worried that if they didn't have those relationships or damaged those relationships in any way, their lottery ticket to possible income might disappear. The simple fact is that and there's just dozens and dozens of young artists coming to me on Twitter every day going, I've got however many million plays, I have 200,000 monthly listeners, I do not make minimum wage. And you just have to pull focus here, guys. There's not enough money in there coming through to the artists in half of the label deals that are out there, however they're being done, whether they're going through independence and then getting upstreamed, or God knows what's going on out there at the moment, all kinds of deals. But the truth is that there's other ways to chop up the pie. We haven't even mentioned the fact that the song is massively undervalued. 13% is a joke, considering that when someone listens to a piece of music, they're probably there to hear the song.
This is the split from streaming revenue between composition and recording royalties.
And we give 13% to the songwriter. And songwriters were in deep trouble well before COVID. Like, it's ridiculous. And the only way they've managed to make money is by carving their way into the master right. So that's become really common in America, is that they just go, right, well, we're writing a song for you, you're going to give us 5% of the master or 10% of the master, and that's how we're going to work it out. In Britain, unfortunately, that hasn't become a norm quite as much. So British songwriters have been really, really struggling. We don't have any equitable remuneration in streaming at all. So non-featured performers don't get anything. No tiny residual money of any description comes out of the system for them, and they're a big part of our world. What are we trying to do with recorded music? Are we trying to give the people who put the value in, are we going to try and extract that value and give it back to them? Or are we just going to say, well, the winners are the winners and the losers are the losers? At the Musicians Union did a report last year into the working musician. 56% of respondents earn less than £20,000 a year, right? That's being a musician, right? Now, it's all well and good to talk about how much it costs to run an office, but we need to get all of this in perspective in terms of where the money's going, how much money's going there. When you've got Sony and Universal in both in Q1 reporting $1 billion each in revenue, when we know that there's probably hundreds of millions in black box just getting shared out through market share for no other reason than the deals that were done with the platforms, when we know about the major labels deals with the platforms on minimum guarantees, which is money that also doesn't go to artists. There's so much money in the system that we are very aware of that doesn't go to artists and doesn't necessarily even go to even the big artists. So there's a lot that needs to really be investigated here. And like I'm saying, pressure needs to be brought. And part of what Broken Record is about is also looking at legislative and regulatory routes, because this industry, if the view is, oh, the ship sailed, well, okay, the ship sailed. Let's go and talk to the politicians, because they're not going to like this mess. And if you guys can't get your act together, if you can't put all your heads together and figure out this amongst yourselves, maybe we do need to step in. Maybe the threat of statutory things, which nobody wants, is the the threat that we all need to get our act together.
I mean, you've been quite careful along this pressure campaign not to point the finger in one particular direction. It's a systemic problem, and because it would be a distraction to say otherwise. Yeah. So with a systemic problem that is sort of ingrained, perhaps Sammy, we can come back to you, because I know you're itching to say something. With an ingrained systemic problem, I guess perhaps the first question is, well, we understand the scale of the problem now. Where do you start?
Well, I mean, I think some people probably have tried to start, and I think that's, you know, when I said before that we all know, again, with all those elephants in the room, that some people absolutely stand to gain from the system as it is. That's the biggest issue that we face, is actually and I actually just saw Kev making the distinction between the songwriters, artists, labels, and that's an important point here as well. But actually, when you carve it up, what we can see publicly facing is that the labels are making a fortune, and that's no longer debatable. But it's taken that long to get to scale, which I think is another important part of this argument, is that for that money to come in, it has taken this long to be able to return our industry to profit. So we, and I've seen loads of issues around, what we don't want to do is pull people out of the streaming market now. That's not what we want to do here. It would be fucking ridiculous to. But we do have to look at how that, if it is that sustainable going forward. And, back to why this is, happening now, I guess, although again, not a new argument, the removal of both the live income from acts that are touring, but also the stuff, the future performance payouts, because in every bar venue and everywhere else in the world is closed, and there are no live events anymore. So that's putting added pressure on. And I can't remember who I saw say it in the press this week, that sort of under the stress test, this doesn't work. And everyone has known that this hasn't worked for a while, but then we have to start looking at solutions. And I think that's where this becomes so, our industry can't agree on anything. Just anything you like. We're arguing now in the press about stuff that they shouldn't be arguing about in the press, while we're trying to speak to government leaders through COVID, and you've got a million trade groups going at each other in the tabloids. Well done, everyone. But this discussion requires that level of conversation. It requires the stakeholders to come to a table. I would prefer not out in public necessarily for those conversations, to actually sit down and go, right, everyone, hands up if you stand to benefit or not from this situation. And actually, I know I'm being idealistic and stupid, and I don't care. I think it needs that level of, we need to understand that the crux of the problem. There's been loads of solutions over the years, put from tech solutions, even, for the black box stuff. We've got stuff like Dubset and Pex that could easily recognize the bloody audio. Don't give me that they can't match tracks. That's a nonsense. But then you've got funding issues for the, for the tech, or there's so many things.
There's a lot, isn't there? I mean, what you said was interesting, and we'll come to you in a second, Patrick, because I know we've got some burning questions on this. Let's start with what you said there. The labels are making a lot of money. There's a lot of money moving around now, and you're saying about getting people together to talk about it, because there's got to be some sort of discussion, an honest discussion. How does that conversation? What's a simple, persuasive argument you could make there to say, hey, this is the right thing to do going forward? We've built this, everything changed in 2000. We've now built a new system.
Let me give you a perfect example. Yeah. Deezer are trying to, right now, they've made it very public, they're trying to get tests out the door for user-centric. Now, everyone's got an argument around why this may or may not work. Let me tell you, having attempted to digest every study, and God, they were hard, like really hard. I had to get a translator out for some of those equations, but none of them are conclusive right now. But what it definitely shows, without doubt, is that niche genres, including classical and jazz, see an increase. And then, but no, I'd like to sit with Deezer in a room for a starter and say, guys, what's the stumbling blocks that you've hit, that you've gone really quiet? Because I think in the industry, everyone's aware of what those stumbling blocks are. And I know for sure that tests have been run across independents and majors with real data sets to show what would come from user-centric streaming and what would come from the existing system. I'd like to see that actually run for artists and for songwriters in the same way. If the labels are allowed to see what that looks like, why the fuck's everyone else not allowed to? Like, there's some things that are already, in progress that are clearly hitting stumbling blocks. And if we're going to talk about solutions, you know, we can't just keep going around in these circles. We've been in this system. The reason I'm so frustrated talking about it, I've been talking about this for nearly 20 years. It's boring, but it's now detrimental. If we remove, you know, and there's other things, of course, with the live stuff. Like if anyone follows me on Twitter, I'm a big advocate for being able to make people pay for live streaming license for a start. And that's a conversation for a different day. Yeah. I'm not saying this is all related to live, but you're going to start having difficult discussions. And, you know, a couple of people's points in here. What I think we do have to be careful on is we have to manage people's expectations. The world and its wife can and do now upload music. And we all know that it's not all great. You know, and I think there's got to be a level somewhere that we as an industry go, what is success and what is acceptable? What number is acceptable for people to be earning a living? What does that look like? No one's ever had that discussion within the you know, the digital age. We've just gone along with stuff, you know, and now it's starting to come undone a little bit. So there's a lot of questions need asking, but to so many people, and we all know what it's like trying to get any honesty out of half of them, like, let alone, you know, and I say this working for most of them, and I can see that some of them are watching, but you know, I'm not saying anything I don't think that's out of order here. I think it's just stuff that's, I've been private messaged a lot this week about this, and people both within the services, within the major labels, within the publishing houses, all think that this needs addressing. They just can't say it publicly.
Right. Okay. Tom, Hen, I know they've got a lot to say, but Patrick, I know we've got, talking of questions, Sammy, we have some questions that you might want to help us with there.
So I'm going to say a thing, and then I'm going to turn over some questions that we've got. From a positive side, and from my side, I work with, in a teaching capacity as well as a management capacity, I work with young songwriters, artists, and producers. And it's become very clear to me how hard this is for them. And all of them are asking me, how do I get success, 1 track, 2 track? And what I'm realizing is that they're not going to make any money until they've got a catalog. And it's very hard for them, which is why they lean on their artist projects and their songwriting and their production. So all these things have to work together for these musicians who are definitely at the brunt of this entire thing. And one of the things that came through in the chat, which I just wanted to echo, I know we've been talking about these closed doors chats, but obviously transparency changed this industry a while ago. And because of transparency, and I want to say, you know, thank you to Spotify for everything they do try and do to help, and the fact that they're leaning into this. And I actually want to say thank you to one of the partners that always gets shit, is YouTube, and I don't think any of us realized what they were doing, but they sat in between this industry of us all debating all of the different levels of partners, and they gave us a tool to go in and see, well, you mentioned PECs there, they gave us a tool to actually go in and understand where all this is happening globally. And
didn't necessarily pay us for it though, did they?
I watch that space when YouTube launches YouTube Music. So, and I've actually started buying things on YouTube. I've actually changed my consumer behavior. I bought a t-shirt from my favorite band this week. I've been buying stuff, and I've been trying, which I think there's another side of this of consumer behavior where we're mad at these people who we've convinced to subscribe to a service, and yet we're not educating them why their $9.99 a month isn't actually supporting their favorite artist. And it's not their fault. They're trying their best, but how do we help communicate that? I'm going to move on from my points to ask some questions from the audience. 2 that are very similar from Sam and from Daniel, which are directed toward major labels, are what's happening with all this money that isn't actually, you know, per stream, that's actually supposed to be going to artists. And do you guys want to talk anything about where that money goes, these licensing fees, which I'm sure you maybe do. And one for you as well, Tom, which again comes from our wonderful Kevin Bacon. Is it really the label's fault and responsibility, or did we actually shift a lot of this to the PROs? And is it actually PRO's time to stand up? I'm asking.
It's always the time for us all to stand up. I mean, now is the time to stand up. That's what Broken Record is. Come on, everybody. Get your hands out your pockets and get on with it. I mean, what are we all waiting for? We know where the systemic problems lie. We have to find solutions. Let's if we're going to be really simplistic about it, let's like create 5 solutions, game them all out, test them all, research them, see how they play out. We have all the data. It's not that hard to do. There are, I'm sure, lots of incredibly talented economists in the world who'd be very happy to do this for us if we gave them the job for the summer. Let's, you know, it really isn't that hard. I mean, there's lots of simple things you could do. You could change it to licensing. The entirety of streaming could be a license. There you go. Becomes 50-50 artist label, straight down the middle. Bang. Deal with it. Next. You know, it's like what happens if you do that? What happens if you look at the way that it's distributed? What about it when the music is pushed out to you via a playlist or an algorithm? That we know that that's paid within Spotify contracts at a different rate to music that people choose. We all know that. So is that distribution, or is that a different service? And if it's a different service, should it be remunerated through the PROs? Should the PROs be saying, we think that money is ours? Maybe they should. I mean, the point is, unless you look at these and properly inspect them and get the actual numbers up and make the effort, you're never going to fix it.
That's part of the issue here, isn't it? Sorry, Tom. But that's like part of the frustration here, I think, is, you know, some of us on various parts of the industry are aware that things are quite deliberately halted. When a conversation gets far, you know, too far down the line, it's halted, or stumbling blocks are put up by certain parties. And the problem with this conversation is that because quite a few people would need to change, and you know, and this would need an overhaul, but it doesn't have to be as painful as everyone's making. Like, what does it matter if you're? Again, we can only really have this conversation, I think, again now, because we're coming from a place of revenue that's in the industry. It was much harder to have it when, you know, when there wasn't any. So that there's somewhere to start. But it's like, hang on, actually, is it fairer, you know, to scoop some of that off the top? Are you going to miss, you know, whatever you're going to, you know, buy in your new fucking Bentley or whatever, while, you know, 10 artists actually can pay their rent for it? There has to be that discussion around fairness, which comes, like Tom said. And I mean, we could talk about this till we're blue in the face. There is no one bullet solution here. There's not.
I mean, that's an interesting point, which is we can talk about some of the suggested solutions in a minute, including user-centric payments, which is very interesting. And like Tom said, once you start looking at the data, things become clearer. When you talk about fairness, Sammy, which is a really good point, because this is, again, coronavirus is making us look at that in a much wider societal sense. And how do you make, when the system has been built in a certain way, how do you make that redistribution of money from let's say that end to the lower end palatable?
Well, even, I mean, you know, I'm not throwing it out as a legitimate solution, but I've had two discussions this week, you know, about things like even applying a logarithmic scale to everything, whereby actually when it starts going up, it starts feeding back into the industry, or, you know, the user-centric stuff, or like, you know, black box. Me and Tom have had a chat on Twitter before about, should black box actually, if it can't be dished out, should it be going into UK cultural stuff, like our venues that are on their fucking knees right now, like, or should it just continue going out to the labels? And there's so many things, but I think in terms of fair, again, it's going back to this conversation. I saw someone in the chat say, why would you want to have it behind closed doors? What I mean by that, I am all for transparency, but I think in order to start this conversation, rather than playing it out again in the press, which makes us look like idiots of an industry that we can't even get our own house in order, there's something to be said for starting those conversations with the right people in the right room, just to start playing out some, even, you know, if we want to go back to the, you know, the data issues, and we all know the failed GDR, you know, the global repertoire fuck up, you know, and however much that cost. I hope Stuart warned you all I was going to swear.
Oh, no, he told me all about that.
But, you know, but there's been some solutions, but put in place that have either, you know, failed or which could actually all add to this, because I think what we're not talking about just putting one thing in place, because that won't work here. No. But if you make smaller but important changes across several things, and just make our industry efficient. You telling me that with everything that we can do, we can't get the tech to pay someone properly? Don't buy it. Don't fucking buy it at all. Tom, and I think that's the sort of things you have to be able to. Sorry, I'm going to mute myself because I'm getting angry.
Every other industry, right, is going to take a massive hit during COVID, right? It's just, we're talking about 25% being wiped off the entire economy, right, in this country at the moment, some economists, which is a bigger recession than we've anyone in living memory in several lifetimes. In fact, it's never happened before, right? And that's where we're at. And yet, Goldman Sachs are putting out a report at the moment based on COVID in the music industry saying, music industry, streaming, golden, winning, still going to grow, Gonna keep growing. It's all gonna grow. Don't worry, guys. Goldman Sachs have got you, right? And the simple fact is that what's really unpalatable, you say, how do we make it palatable for the people who've got all of this money to give it to a few little people? What's really unpalatable is the way that it is. The let them eat cake, like resigned position that we're in. It's just an outrage. It's ridiculous. It's like, come on, you're making so much money. It doesn't matter.
Do you think then that you need to start at an even higher level of looking at the kind of hyper-capitalism? And is that not sort of an even bigger problem,
Yeah,
now, even bigger picture?
I mean, you have got fundamentally the biggest problem we're going to have with this is, like, we're talking about trying to get people behind closed doors to have a conversation, but the biggest problem we're going to have is the biggest companies that are doing it just answer to their shareholders. So how do we get them in the room? How is it in their interests to help us to sort this out when they are only really answerable to their shareholders? And it's a really complicated question, which and it's one that I'm trying to and with the help of Sammy and lots of other people is to figure out, because for me the situation we're in is the deeply unpalatable one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a multifaceted problem that's going to take a lot of different simultaneous solutions. So let's think about one of them. User-centric payment has been spoken about for a while. Deezer, Sammy, I think Sammy mentioned, has been experimenting with it, and it's sort of fallen off the radar a bit. Perhaps we can go around the panel with this one. Hen, I know you've been out of the conversation for a little bit, so I want to bring you back in. You can talk about this, I guess, in two ways. The idea of user-centric payment, of the money being distributed directly to the artist the user listens to, but then as well, there's another issue here of, as Tom said at the beginning, only paying $9.99 a month, and that's been the case for the last 13 years. So, well, you can take that either way, but
well, yeah, I mean, first off, I just want to say I was not saying before that there's no struggling musicians. I work for a DIY distribution company. And I've spent pretty much the last 8 or 9 weeks talking to struggling musicians. So there is very much a real issue about the lack of income. I understand that. But I mean, what you're saying in terms of increasing prices, they try, Spotify tried it in Norway and it was successful. They maintained and even increased their subscriptions there. Unfortunately, this shitstorm of COVID now hits, which has probably put a little bit of a damper on any plans to increase subscription prices, because you are going to risk I think personally, you're going to risk quite a lot of bad PR by increasing prices when the world's going to go through a massive recession, which is a shame. I absolutely think that there was an appetite for it. So if you asked me 10 weeks ago, I would have said yes, absolutely.
Do you think people perhaps now, the standard people, we're talking as music fans who dig in and buy t-shirts and vinyl and support, the standard music fan, and Patrick's dying to speak and I'll come to him in a moment, but the standard music fan who just loves to play music, they stream it on the phone, on the bus or whatever. I mean, it doesn't seem too ridiculous to expect them to pay $2.50 more a month, does it?
No, but I don't think I don't think personally as an industry that we're very good at communicating the value of music to fans. Right. I don't think that we are doing a good enough job, to communicate why that should be increased from $9.99.
Even now when we're doing when the World and the Twice is doing a live video stream, it's sometimes it does have to land on us to put the value back in. Sorry, I'm muting.
No, Sammy. Well, either Sammy, Tom, or Hen, or Patrick, you can all jump in here. Why has music then, in this case, Tom, you were talking about like very high-level systemic problems when you're talking about capitalism and the change it makes. Why and how have we reached a position where perhaps there is a strong disconnect between the amount you pay and what you get in return for music? And Hen, you made a good point about communicating the value of music, which is sort of dissipated. How do you bring that back? Patrick, I'm going to start with you because I think it'll explode if I don't ask you.
I'm going to let you finish. But I quickly wanted to pull a couple things in here. Here's a little soapbox from me. I have a brother that works in film. He just had a film that came out only on HBO globally. I do not subscribe to HBO. I actually got in a big fight with him because I haven't seen his film. I signed up to Netflix when I got his first film. I started paying for Gaia. I've been buying stuff on YouTube. And maybe we could look at film to understand where there's different platforms and you have to pay for different ones, which obviously doesn't really work in music. People have tried that, the sort of exclusives idea. And part of this question that comes from the audience, which I will put out there as more part of understanding all this, as Sasha has asked, that we talk about the artist as a magical creature that deserves more. And actually, is there something, which is what film does? It's, if you've ever tried to get film on Netflix, it's hard. You can't just go upload like we can to Spotify. And is there actually something here that because of music, we let anyone come and share that voice? It doesn't matter if the Beatles, Bob Dylan, or a DIY artist going through CD Baby, you can be on the same platform, one subscription that rules them all, that isn't very expensive. And is there actually something to this? And I'm just putting this out there to people, of, are we allowing too many of them in? That's the question from the audience.
I think that, you know, there's a dark corner of Spotify that nobody has ever seen and most people will never dive into. I don't think we should be in the business of restricting who should be able to publish their art. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, again, it's a fundamental question, Tom.
Man, it's a fallacy. There's always been more music than any one person can listen to. So it's a nonsense. It's a very good argument for user-centric, because the whole point being is that if your money just goes to what you listen to, you certainly can't listen to 55 million tracks, can you? Or you could try.
And is that something, do you think user-centric, I'll come to you in a second, Sammy, do you think that user-centric payment, Tom, which is perhaps what people assume happens already but doesn't, when they pay money to a streaming platform, do you think that that would be, as a tool, as a system, would help people reconnect that value?
100%. I think it's the reason why user-centric has been so useful in the conversation I've been having with lots of different people, is that it gives people real insight into the fact that their money isn't connected to the value that they have with, you know, that they assign to music. They're just like, it just goes in and it disappears off. You know, why doesn't my money go to my music? You know, why doesn't that happen? And it's ridiculous.
And there's a wider discussion there, isn't there, that we have in the last 20 years, things have changed so rapidly, and we have allowed systems be put into place that are convenient. You know, $9.99 a month, all the music ever would, you know, for the me that was sort of 15 in a record shop in, you know, 1995
really simple
or whatever.
Why isn't there a separate system for businesses that just play music all day long on Spotify? What
but
I mean,
there is
Spotify for brands, isn't it?
Okay, right. So that exists, but if you go into a business, they're just using personal Spotify accounts.
Yeah, no, they are, but they're getting into in innovation within, as an industry, we kind of let a load of stuff just happen. You know, we really, or maybe not let, that's the wrong word. Some of us shouted about it, but perhaps left money on the table in some places because of all the bloody reasons that we've spoken about already. But user-centric, so that does have its own arguments, and again, I don't believe, I've not seen one study that's been conclusive at all.
No.
It tells me it needs to be explored more, but I'll tell you what the arguments are for and against it. So we know that niche things go up. I read somewhere, and I think it was official Spotify data, that your average person listens to 41 different acts. Your average person, 41 different acts a week. Some of the arguments around this is that, well, surely, you know, if, let's say, because there's so many different types of listeners, and Mark Mulligan actually posted about this. He was saying, you know, would we devalue the super fan? But actually, would we? And would people be happy with that? Because they're like, actually, this guy loves music and he listens to 500 artists a month. So what does that rate look like? Like, do we then split the pie even lower? But if your average user listens to 41 artists a week, that actually, in all the calculations I've seen, means that the pie's up for everyone. So it's a really, it needs more work. And the tech, like, there's an argument, I've seen loads of people and they can just shut up about it, with the amount of money that it would cost to implement a system. Again, if you think that the technology that exists cannot split a user-based thing, then it's ridiculous. It will be there, might be expensive, but it's there.
I mean, just to add, to get the final answer from you on the sort of the idea of reconnecting value with music, do you think user-centric is the best way to do that, or is there something else that we've not spoken about?
I think, again, I don't think any of us know. I think we'd all we'd be liars if any of us sat here and said, I've got the answer.
I'm open to speculation as well.
I think what we're saying, all of us, and I think that's where the unity comes into this, because actually there's quite a lot of people on different sides of this fence going, actually, do you know what? Can we just agree on one thing, that it's not right? Can we agree that there is a problem and then look at all these solutions? User-centric needs more research. It needs funded properly huge at scale. I've not seen anything at scale. We need to see it at scale.
What do you think about user-centric, Hen? Because you're working at a company that distributes things and collects money and
I do. So I'm also Norwegian, and I know that a lot of the organizations in the Nordics have been very heavily pro the user-centric argument. I'm kind of with Sammy on this one. I'm a little bit on the fence. I think it's an idea that should be explored. I've seen a lot of data that suggests that, a major heritage catalog will do quite well out of it. I do have to admit that I worry for the segment of the market that I work in, because I think a lot of the artists that we represent would be the kind of, be part of the user experience whereby people listen to a lot more than 41 artists a month, They're the ones that really start digging into genres. I'm not sure. Again, I don't think we can say anything conclusive about it right now. I wish there was a lot more data available, a lot of public data, so that, not just the execs can form their opinions about this, but maybe, those of us that are going to be working in this industry for quite some time.
And it's the people, isn't it, as well? You brought an interesting point in there, which is, users are not the problem. Users are paying $9.90 a month because they're asked to pay $9.99 a month. And we're talking about increasing value. So perhaps this brings us back, Tom, to why your campaign this time has resonated. It's not just resonating with us, people who work in the industry. The public who love music are interested in this now as well. So why? And is the first question. And the second question is, what impact might it have? We're talking about trying user-centric payments at scale. If a service switched to that, would it convince people to switch to that service?
I think if any of the major platforms was brave enough and could manage to work it with the major labels to offer a different offering, which gives more money to artists and writers, we would all move across to that platform the next day. Because if there's a hell of a selling point for a platform, it's that you are about the music. They all try and pretend that they are, and then get themselves involved in legal disputes in other countries, which make them look like they're not. And then you kind of go, well, are you or aren't you? They all want to be. And the reason why they want to be is yes, the artists are magical, actually.
Yeah. Sammy, perhaps I can just steer that towards you a little bit. I know you've got something to say.
Just on that, because it's important, actually.
Okay.
In a bit, without naming the names, every major streaming service that I've spoken to, off record, says that if it was proven that user-centric worked, they would move to it immediately, because it doesn't matter who they pay out. They pay the same money out regardless. That's what everyone forgets in this. They don't give a fuck. As long as the split that they're getting is the same. So it's just a way of the tech to be able to pay it out properly. So
talking about tech then, Sammy, and you've mentioned it a lot about technology being available and it's there. Does this actually bring us to a slightly another way of looking at streaming platforms, which is we view them as this window to sort of gaze through at all music? Is there an argument to say that streaming platforms, if they want to, and the whole industry wants to re-engage value with music, it needs to be more two-way? If I was getting a more two-way experience with my favorite artist through a streaming platform, not just, well, I'm paying money and somehow it reaches them, but I was allowed to communicate or buy things, or I don't know, like in the Chinese streaming platforms, for instance, which are more interactive. Could that be a way forward?
I don't think it's a way forward. I think it should be a part of every streaming service. Again, not all streaming services are equal. Some of them do offer incentive, for push outs for data, for merchandise, for ticketing, but being able to nurture that relationship, I don't think any of them have got it right yet. I think actually weirdly the leaders in it are probably Spotify within that sense. And I think they have proven that they've been trying to do that. So the more needs to be done. And this is such a wide debate. But I think over the next, taking it right back to Tom's thing at the start of this, when this money starts running out, and it's not going to impact the people that are sat on their millions. We know it's not going to do that. But as the money starts running out, both from live and from long-term performance income, this conversation is only going to get louder. And I say that with some certainty. So I think now is a very good time to at least have, I'm glad that you guys are having the discussion, and I'm glad that you've invited us on. And I'm sorry that I've sworn so much.
No, it's been colourful. It's been exciting. Thank you. Patrick, you've spotted a couple of questions Am I right?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've had some really interesting questions that I don't think we can go into given the time, but Sean Adams has asked some great questions about user-centric streaming.
Sean.
I would suggest everyone go research it to better understand, as Sammy has said. One question that we've got left here that was a pretty big one, and I think it is fair to say, we've been talking a lot about labels, we've been talking a lot about PROs, but we've really not talked much about publishing in this conversation. And the question is basically, do master rights and publishing rights need to be approaching this together, which is those of us that worked in this industry for a long time, and people don't realize this, the two are they're two different businesses. They're definitely two different businesses. We call it the music business, but they're literally two different ones. I worked for AWOL, I worked for Cobalt, I worked in a publishing company. It doesn't make me a publisher. I tried to understand it better, and the two of us don't even understand each other that well sometimes, I think. And I think that's a really good question from the audience about what else publishing, what comes in there.
Tom, you mentioned earlier about how the composition had been devalued in comparison to the recording.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, obviously with music's been devalued anyway. $9.99 in 2008, $9.99 now. $9.99 in 2008 has the buying power of £13.44 now. So that's something like 28% devaluation of the totality within Spotify. Then you go, well, what's 13% of that? You know, from back then to now, with a 28% drop, and you start to see how bad that is for songwriters. Yeah. And we have to look after that craft. If we don't look after that craft, I mean, you can say, oh, we're Luddites or whatever. The reason why we'll lose songwriting eventually will be because of artificial intelligence, probably. But it shouldn't be because the music industry abandoned the people who write the songs. That should just not be the reason why we lose them, and I just it's just silly.
I mean, well, perhaps we can move on in a second to sort of realistic next.
Universal though would negotiate down their cut from whatever it was, 57 to 52 or whatever they did, and give more money to Spotify and not go, you know what? If we're going to come down, why don't we give a bit of that to Spotify and a bit of that to the song? Hey. I mean, it's not like we haven't got a massive publishing company as well who would be really happy if we gave it to them.
I mean, yeah, there's been a big shift. We talked about the industry rebuilding in the last 20 years, and one argument you could make, this is very broad brushstrokes, is that it's shifted from a creative, artistic industry selling objects to a tech industry that supplies music files, and it's brought a lot of the tech industry dynamics economically with it. Is this a sort of reckoning at the moment, do you think, where the industry has to acknowledge the value of creativity?
It's what looks like a tech disruptive industry, but actually all we've done is we've imprinted the 20th century business structure on top of it and gone, that'll sort of work, I think. And it hasn't really been disruptive in any true sense. All it's done is actually been hyper conservative. It has led to the major labels being the people who are the biggest winners, which was the same in the 1970s. Yeah, so it's like, what's changed, everybody? You know,
but a lot has though, Tom. I mean, that's one of the things that I get, you know, frustrated about this. About the industry is, for me, more exciting than it's ever been, and in some ways, you know, the opportunities and the fact that even that people are coming in and challenging the PROs. I love that smaller companies are coming in and going, let me show you how to do this job that you've been saying you couldn't do for years. So there are great inventions out there, and there are great solutions out there.
Yeah, you're right to say it. Sorry.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? There's more opportunities than ever, but also perhaps the parts we want to change are magnified even stronger. Patrick, question, and then
I'm a sock puppet for Kevin Bacon. If you've not figured that out yet, I don't have my own opinions.
Wasn't an album by The Fall, sock puppet for
Kevin Bacon of the Comsat Angels, legendary bass player. I only work for bass players. So the question,
I haven't seen Kevin for a few years. It's nice to.
Well, this is for you, Tom. Kev's asking you, sock puppeting through me. Has the PRS done anything, and you maybe can speak to the PRS, giving businesses a COVID-19 holiday? Are you guys, is there anything actually because of this decrease, if you can say, but that's what Kev's asked.
I couldn't tell you actually what the exact situation is on that. I will tell you.
They have, because my husband's restaurant got it.
There you go, great. So there is a holiday. There's also, I know that I've got a special PRS meeting very shortly on the subject too. So I can tell you that there's a lot happening.
Okay, and someone in chat has actually shared a link to that as well, if you're interested. So perhaps I mean, I know we could keep on talking about this forever, but I'm sure everybody wants to go and do something else and stop gnashing their teeth. And we can continue this another time. It'd be great to get everyone back, maybe in a few weeks, to have this conversation when things have moved on a bit. But and I would love that, of course. And what realistically, if you could, I know this is a very difficult question, but we have to start somewhere. And we'll go around the panel. What would be a great, practical, realistic first step that an element of the industry or a group of people could do?
We need a streaming summit.
Right. So, in bringing just the streaming platforms or labels, or
everybody represented in the room, with the knowledge that what we've got isn't right.
Right. Great. Okay. Let's go to Hen next. And
in a way, kind of following on from that, I think we need to come together as an industry and be able to decide on a messaging towards the public. I think it's important, coming back to the whole thing about value of music, potentially increasing prices, etc. I think we have a lot of work to do there, why that needs to happen and why we need to pay artists more.
Great, thank you. You're all being very succinct, and that's great. Which brings us to Sammy. What do you think?
Definitely both of those two things. And I guess from my perspective, it would also be I would want to see wide-scale research commissioning that is actually made available, because I can't say who or why or anything, but I'm aware that there is data that exists that we're not seeing. And I think that when we're talking about, the last 10 years about transparency, there's also a level of hide it under the mat and hope
Tell us more, Sammy. I'm interested in this.
No, I won't. But it does exist, and I think in order for an industry to not look like a bunch of idiots, we need to make an informed decision from every stakeholder's point. This is my big gripe with it, is that not every stakeholder is part of that conversation, which is why, a conversation like Tom's suggesting, that's the only way this works. And no, not everyone's going to like every result, but, can we do some give and take across several subjects, make it palatable for everyone and allow our artists to eat and pay their rent?
And before we come to you, Patrick, I mean, it certainly has felt like over the last few years that the screw has been tightened and tightened and tightened in a much wider sense, as well as in the music industry. And now we're at a point where something perhaps like you're suggesting, these summits and recalibrations can happen. Patrick, what do you think?
We have one more question, and I don't know if I want to open this can of worms at the very end here, but I'm going to go in, and Sasha, once again, has asked another great question that I'm going to put out there, of the effect of the elephant in the room, as she calls it, and the ridiculous amount of money, as she says, being poured into the money pit, as she says, of Facebook and Google for advertising. I'm going to say one thought on it is that when you think about advertising for a stream, of course, it doesn't make sense, which is why we at Music Ally are always focused on building artist careers and using advertising to drive artist careers, which is a long-term fan building exercise. But anyone want to say anything about the amount of money, as we all know, 80% of music marketing spends go into the Facebook ecosystem. The rest of that goes into the Google ecosystem. Go ahead.
The bigger question there is who's paying that out for the first few years of an artist's career? That's the question that I'd like to put to people when we're talking about actually who are the early investors. But I mean, anyone can say what they like. I know, because we work across it as well as manage some of it, a developing artist now has to do, and a manager now has to put in so much themselves across all of those platforms. And then, yes, of course, when it gets up to that scale, and I believe in the value of a label, don't get that wrong. I've worked with them, I've worked with them. I believe in the value of a record label, but in a scale of, well, how much are you putting into this actually? And at what stage do you just become a distribution service? Because I can tell you, I work with some labels where it's questionable actually at scale. Is that actually, are you investing or are you actually a distributor dressed as a label? And those are two completely different things as well. I'm going to shut up now.
To continue rummaging in this can of worms, which perhaps brings us a little bit round to what, as Tom was mentioning at the beginning, and Tom, of course, you were someone who signed a record deal 20 years ago, and maybe, I don't know the terms of your deal, of course, but people signed them a long time ago and they still exist. we talk about getting everyone in a room and saying, right, we need to make a change. Does that extend to labels and the contractual relationships they have with artists? Because if we're talking about, we're in the time of supporting artists are essential and they need to have careers, is the contract something that needs to change on an individual basis as well?
I mean, this, of course, I mean, breakages, that's just a joke, isn't it? It's laughable. I mean, everyone knows it's laughable, and yet it's sitting in the middle of the system still. I mean, breakages, hello? How do you break the internet? 10% of it? How did you do that? Okay, so that's ridiculous, and frankly, actually should be regulated against. And then you have things like, you know, I mean, there's so many layers to this. The majors had the same moment that the independents had when all the independents got rid of unrecouped debts, got rid of breakages, increased streaming royalties. The majors had the opportunity to do the same thing, and they didn't do it. And yeah, so you've got with catalog, it's a obviously, if you wanted to free it up, if you want all of those artists to re-engage and get excited about selling their music in the streaming era, yeah, how do you do that? You take your boot off their neck. That's how you do it. Then everyone would get excited about streaming. You'd have David Crosby singing the joys of streaming suddenly, you know, because their catalogs would be liberated from these awful deals that should not stand. So yes, of course it's to do with that. But that is not what this is the point, is that is not what my campaign's about. No. It's no skin off my nose. I don't make my money from streaming. I can't make money from streaming because I've got a pre-2001 record contract. I make my money as a composer writing for theatre and film. And one of the reasons why I feel so comfortable talking about this is because it really isn't. I'm only speaking out for my friends and colleagues. I'm not speaking out because I'm trying to liberate my rights from a silly contract that I wrote that I signed when I was a child.
But I'm sure if you had the opportunity, you would take it to renegotiate.
Yeah. If Universal want to do me a favor, yeah, great.
Maybe someone's watching. You never know.
UMG, you listening? Come on.
You never know. Now I realize now that we have sort of yacked on and we've gone 15 minutes over, and I'm very grateful for you hanging around. So I think perhaps we're going to wrap it up. And now, Hen, we normally talk to you at this stage about some positive news stories from the week, but I wonder if we might need to sort of delay that for next week. I don't know. Have you got something?
We can delay it for next week if you want to.
Okay, we'll do that. Oh, wait a minute.
Hen, text me some positivity later, please.
I will do.
Hen, if you've got something now, let us know. If you've got something.
I do. Do you know what? This week, I just did a quick roundup of some of the artist-led initiatives that's been going on in the last couple of weeks, with Bon Iver releasing their new music video on Direct Relief to raise money for PPE for healthcare professionals across the US. The Prince Estate are doing a 3-day streaming event across YouTube that started yesterday. That's also to raise funds for WHO. And this week, there was also a big virtual telethon organized in New York that raised $115 million for the population of New York that's been affected by Corona. So I think I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of interesting artist-led initiatives right now that we should all be supporting.
A remarkable reminder of the power of music and what can be done if people get united behind a cause, Tom, which I guess is what is giving you a lot of hope at the moment. And on that note, I guess that pulled it all together nicely. Thank you, Hen. That was excellent and just what we needed. So that's Hen at CD Baby. And if people have got a story they want to suggest you to share for next week, your email address.
Please email me on henrietta@cdbaby.com.
And that's Henrietta with an E at the end.
Yeah, sorry.
I always forget. Now, so that's it. So I think as we've run over, I'm going to let everyone go, but thank you ever so much. And thank you for the audience for the chat room, I believe, as the kids say, has been popping off. And it's been on fire. So thank you for everyone for all the great questions and all the good conversations there. This video will be on YouTube shortly for you to watch again if you want to dig back into it, because we did talk about a lot of things there. And first of all, enormous thanks to our two very special guests, Tom Gray and Sammy Andrews. Thank you very much. And we'd love to have you back.
Sorry for swearing so much, and
I think next time more. I want you to push harder for the swearing next time.
Joe, thank you. Thank you so much. And to our YouTube audience, when you guys tune in to this other broadcast, I would hope that maybe Tom and Sammy and Hen and myself might comment back on your YouTube comments if you want this to go even further. It's going to be on YouTube forever. So
or come and follow me and Tom on Twitter, where we talk about it a lot.
How can they follow you on Twitter then? What's the best way of following you?
At Sammy Andrews with a Y.
At Sammy Andrews with a Y?
With an A.
At Mr. Tom Gray with an A. Wow, we've got all the spellings today.
Yeah,
yes, and thank you both ever so much. It'd be great to get you back perhaps in the future, maybe with some of the people from the parties that we've been talking about today.
Do that panel. It'd be great. I promise we'll swear less.
Well, we'll try and pull that one together. You can swear all you like. I don't mind. We'll try and pull that one together. So Tom, best of luck on the 24th. If you want to remind people about this, the Twitter Listening Party Festival.
Yeah, the Broken Record Festival, Tim's Twitter Listening Party, 24th of May. Starting.
Excellent. And and Sammy, thank you for your insight. And you've been talking about this a lot on Twitter, so people can follow you and pick up more of your thoughts, swear words or none, as you choose.
There's a few of those also, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, hey, we're living in an online world where that doesn't matter anymore. Now, next week, we're going to be joined, we're hoping, by Tusha Willis, co-founder of Terrible Merch, to talk about innovation in merchandising, connecting with audiences and building those connections with your fans in non-streaming ways, but hopefully the connection between that as well. So that should be fascinating, talking about those connections directly between fan and artist in other ways. Next week, you can follow Music Ally on Twitter at Music Ally, or on Facebook at Music Ally FB. I wonder who took the Music Ally. And you can email Music Ally. You can email Anthony. That's right. His email should be in the chat somewhere. It's anthony@musically.com. So finally, Sammy, thank you very much. Tom, very grateful. You must have been talking about this all week, and now you can go and have a glass of wine and perhaps take a few hours off from it. And Hen, thank you as always for joining us from your slightly different angle in your home this week. No shrubbery behind you. But always a pleasure, never a chore to see you. And of course, how could I forget Patrick?
Actually, Joe, I had a question for you. I'm not done. Like, I want to see some more Zooming paneling. Would you have any suggestions of a place I should go next after this?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Yes, thank you for reminding me. It's important to note that there's a free AIM event happening today, which is the AIM House. Is that right? And you can jump straight across from here to there, and I'll drop a link in the chat. Now, if I can find it. Yes, here it is. It's a free event. It's happening today, and we're encouraging people if they want to have more chat, they can go across. There's the link in the chat, and go across that now. Register. You can jump straight back in, see all the talks that have been happening today, and ones that are happening just about now, immediately after this one as well. So thank you for the reminder, Patrick. Patrick, thank you as well for being on hand. And sharing your wisdom and being in Question Corner. That's it. So farewell, everyone. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all here again soon. I'm talking in the grand sense of everyone who's joined us today. Thanks very much again. I've been Joe Sparrow. Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you.